So tax cuts and reform are certainly not over, but we're going to move on to another topic. The FBI has been in hot water for the past few weeks as we've seen biased texts against anti-Trump bias at the FBI. What is the status of the investigation from the House? You're on the Oversight Committee, you're on the Judiciary Committee in the House. What is going on now with that scandal?
Well, I think it's important to point out, obviously there was a lot of anti-Trump sentiment with this key FBI agent, Peter Strzok, who is the lead agent for the Hillary investigation and the lead agent in this Russia investigation. But it was more than that. He wrote a text message to Lisa Page talking about a meeting that they had in Andrew McCabe's office, who's the FBI deputy director. And he said, "I wish I could take what you said about Trump not being able to win and take that to the bank, but I'm not sure that the FBI can take that risk. And we need an insurance policy basically to stop Trump from being elected." So that is the reason he got kicked off the Mueller probe. And so the question is, what was that insurance policy? Most of us on the committees at this point go back to that Steele dossier that was paid for by Hillary and the Democratic Party to dig up dirt on Trump. There's a lot of fake news in there, false claims. Nevertheless, the FBI took cognizance of that dossier at some point. We're trying to figure out whether the FBI paid Christopher Steele for that, and then whether the FBI used any of that to get surveillance over Trump associates. And if that's the case, if the answer to those questions is yes, then what you have is the Obama DOJ working with the Hillary campaign and Democratic Party to get surveillance over someone associated with the opposite party. That's a major deal if true.
Right. So what about the accountability aspect of this? Because we have the American people who see this happening over and over again inside of the government. What are you doing specifically? Are there subpoenas on the table? Are contempt charges on the table for the FBI not answering your questions? Andy McCabe was on the Hill this week testifying. It doesn't seem like lawmakers are satisfied with what he said because his testimony was not in congruence with other testimony that's been given by other witnesses. So how does this actually move forward in terms of some kind of accountability and cleaning up the FBI?
So all subpoenas for sure. McCabe has come in, very unsatisfactory testimony, and you see the news today. He's moving on, and I think that may be a reason why. We need to subpoena Bruce Orr, who was one of Sally Yates, the deputy AG's right-hand man at the Justice Department. He was meeting with the author of the dossier, Christopher Steele, during the election, and his wife works for Fusion GPS. So you got to subpoena Orr, you got to subpoena the wife, you got to subpoena other folks like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page who were involved in this. They need to be under oath. They need to be deposed. None of the stuff like they did with Hillary where they just asked her some softball questions, didn't put her under oath, didn't transcribe. These are legitimate, transcribed, and if they lie, then they'll be held accountable. But contempt for sure. If the FBI isn't going to give us the information that we're asking for in terms of the dossier, then we should hold both Rosenstein and Christopher Wray in contempt.
Yeah, it's far from over. It's going to be a wild ride once we get back from the new year, I'm sure. Merry Christmas, Congressman Ron DeSantis. Thanks so much.
Merry Christmas.
Very busy night of news. My next guest says the FBI's Andrew McCabe viewed his job as one to help Democrats and hurt Trump, using whatever power he had from his FBI perch. Former DOJ attorney J. Christian Adams joins me now. It's great to see you. Now, we're going to start with what the president said about this. He's been criticizing the FBI publicly. President Trump tweeted a series of things today. This is one that he tweeted earlier. How can FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, the man in charge, along with leaking James Comey of the phony Hillary Clinton investigation, including her 33,000 illegally deleted emails, be given $700,000 for wife's campaign by Clinton puppets during investigation? Now, you were in it. You were in the Justice Department. You see how these creatures of government function. How does this happen? How is it that the FBI can treat people differently based on their political leanings?
People need to understand these people in the FBI and DOJ, they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They think this is normal operating procedure. What the president is referring to is Andrew McCabe's wife was running for office in Virginia, got a load of money from Terry McAuliffe, the governor, who was also under investigation by the FBI. And, of course, they don't have to return all that money in Virginia. They can keep it, so Andrew McCabe actually benefited. These people don't think they're doing anything anything wrong. They think their job, apparently Andrew McCabe thinks, is to protect Democrats.
Well, so this week, Republicans, this week and last week, have been very critical of Andrew McCabe. You have Senator Chuck Grassley, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, calling for him to be removed. We now hear that he's maybe going to retire here in a couple of months, making sure he gets enough time in to get his full pension. So Republican criticism seems warranted based on what we know so far.
Right, but he's still there. And best of all, Katie, he's in the HR department at the FBI where he can replicate himself. You know, I mean, they move people to HR instead of moving them out the door. But that's part of the problem is you have McCabe, you have Rod Rosenstein, who doesn't stop any of the leaks inside the Mueller investigation. He should be firing people who are leaking, not giving them the benefit of the doubt and praising them like he did this week.
So what about the firing? Because people are questioning, why is it that President Trump can't just remove Andrew McCabe from his position, right? My understanding, he is a civil servant. He is not a political appointee, and therefore the president cannot fire him. Now, can Christopher Wray, who is reported, who's the new FBI director, who is reportedly reassigned FBI top lawyer James Baker, or he has actually resigned as well. Is Christopher Wray able to do something about this problem in the FBI? Is he trying to clean house?
Wray is, but so are a lot of other people. And really the problem stops with Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein, who's the deputy attorney general after Sessions recused himself, he has a whole host of deputies who work for him who are giving cover to these FBI people. Anytime this gets brought up, Rosenstein and his deputies push back. They defend McCabe. They defend the FBI. So the problem is both at the FBI but also inside the DOJ.
So there's nothing that the president can do? Should the president be getting involved? Is it consequential for him to be tweeting about it? Does that hurt the inspector general's investigation into the bias at the FBI? Or is it best that he just kind of stays out of it?
Look, I think it's good that we finally have a president who fights back against these bureaucrats, because these bureaucrats have been getting away with it for a very long time. Finally, somebody's paying attention. Thank goodness they're at 1600.
Well, what about the bureaucrats, though? Because the frustration, as I talked about in the first block with Congressman DeSantis, is there never seems to be any accountability. The IRS was turned into a political tool and weapon against conservatives. It seems like, and based on your experience and what you know, this is the same situation.
Right. Look, they have normalized politics at the Justice Department. You wrote about this about Fast and Furious. You saw this starting to happen years ago, where Holder and Obama began to turn this engine of government power into something that helps their ideological agenda. That's what's happening here. That's what happened during the election.
So how do we move forward with this? How is it that, you know, we live in Washington, D.C., or in Virginia, I call the freedom side of the river. It is anyway so far. It might change. But this is a blue area. This is a liberal area. The federal government is inherently deeply connected to liberal politics. So how is it that we have this going forward, and how do we make sure that there isn't political bias at the FBI?
Well, look, the people who care about this in middle America and regular real world, not around here, need to be vocal, need to tell their senator, tell their president, don't allow this corruption to continue. Don't allow people like Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok and that whole gang of activist law enforcement agents to influence politics. That's not their job.
So what about people who would push back and say they're not activists, they're not a gang of politically motivated people, they were simply doing their job?
Yeah, I read the tweets, or I read the texts. That's not a gang of neutral people. That's a gang of people who want to use their power to sabotage a presidential campaign. That's what the FBI did under Andrew McCabe and his cohorts. That's what is still going on at the Justice Department in Rod Rosenstein's office with all of his deputies defending Andrew McCabe.
Well, Jay Kirschadams, always appreciate your input.
Thanks,
and bringing your experience to the table. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Street justice still ahead, and next, the White House with an angry response after an explosive New York Times article says the president made offensive comments about immigrants. All of it based on anonymous sources, of course. So is it fair? We're going to debate it next. Developing tonight, the White House denying a New York Times report citing anonymous sources that say President Trump spoke about immigrants, specifically groups from Haiti and Africa, in a derogatory way. The comments allegedly came during a June meeting with top administration officials. Only the White House says it didn't happen, responding, quote, General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Nielsen, and all other senior staff actually in the meeting deny these outrageous claims, and it's both sad and telling the New York Times would print the lies of their anonymous sources anyway. Here with reaction To this and much more, former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor David Tafuri and GOP strategist Ned Ryan. Well, Ned, here we have another New York Times story with a bunch of anonymous sources alleging that the president used the words AIDS to describe people living in Haiti and Huts to describe refugees or immigrants from Nigeria. What do you have to say about this?
Well, Katie, I mean, this is hardly surprising. Here we go again. The opposition party at work. Again, the White House is denying. It's another anonymously sourced piece that is another sad attack on Donald Trump. But, Katie, I think we're going to see more of this. We're going to see this increase as time goes along because, listen, their Russian collusion fairy tale is falling apart. The wheels are coming off the Mueller investigation. You see the economy surging. You see the markets surging. Trump's actually closing out a very strong first year despite a lot of different attacks. And the mainstream media, I think, starting to get a little bit more desperate. I mean, this guy wasn't supposed to win in the first place, Katie. Now he's actually succeeding. Wasn't he supposed to be impeached by now, according to some of them? Dear God, he's actually succeeding. And you see this liberal elite fury rising that those damnable peasants won't listen to us anymore. And I would tell the mainstream media, you know what? Get used to disappointment and get used to another 7 years of Trump because it's going to happen.
David, what's your reaction to another New York Times story throwing out these very aggressive allegations and without any on-the-record sources to back them up?
I hope your viewers will read this story because it paints a really troubling picture of the White House, and it's based on two sources who were in the meeting, and
anonymous.
Both of those sources...
Anonymous.
Yeah, they're anonymous because they get fired.
Put your name on the record.
Because they get fired if they said who they were. But they also contemporaneously told other people about these comments, and in the story itself is based on dozens of interviews that the New York Times did. And the New York Times knew that they was going to get a lot of pushback on this story, so it brought it up to its top editors. It evaluated the story, and you can be sure it's standing behind the story. Of course, we have libel laws, we have defamation. If anyone thinks the story is not true, they can bring an action against the New York Times.
Well, the president's not going to.
I bet that's not going to happen because it hasn't happened yet.
Well,
you know what?
The president is not going to. No. Let's move on to a different topic. The president is not going to bring a lawsuit against the New York Times because he'd be suing them every single day. However, let's move on to another topic. Last week, Attorney General Jeff Sessions officially announced an investigation into the handling of the Uranium One scandal under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Ned, is this a good idea? Where is this going to go?
Of course it is. It's about time. I mean, I have a lot of questions. I wrote a piece actually for Fox News Opinion back in October. This deal was done in an expedited fashion. The CFIUS voting members, they got the paperwork in the first week of August of 2010. It was approved October 22nd of 2010. And there were deals, Katie. This was approved faster than a lot of the mergers between two U.S. companies that were approved by the antitrust division inside Obama's DOJ. Why was it expedited? The other question, Katie, is why were we giving away uranium when we actually have to import 89% of the uranium that we use? The other question I think needs to be answered is, we knew, some of the CFIUS voting members knew, there was a bribery attempt by the Russian government of U.S. executives in the uranium industry, and they still went ahead and approved this issue. And the last one, the $145 million question, Katie, is what is the relationship between the Uranium One deal and the Clinton Foundation? Was our Secretary of State at that time influence peddling and actually using her position for personal gain and putting it ahead of our national security interests?
So, David, on that note of national security, given your experience and your advising to former President Barack Obama, if Democrats are so worried about Russia being an influence in the world and being an enemy of the United States, which they are, by the way, why would Hillary Clinton sit on this board of directors, essentially, while having this conflict of interest at the Clinton Foundation, the Global Initiative, and approve the sale of uranium to Russia through another company?
It's important to get some of the facts straight. It's not a board of directors. CFIUS is a U.S. government committee that approves of mergers and acquisitions that will affect national security. There are 9 heads of U.S. government agencies on that committee. So there was no way that Hillary Clinton on her own could have dominated that committee. And any one out of the 9 can stop a deal. All 9 voted in favor of this deal. So it's important to get the facts right. Now, this is about 7 or 8 years old. It's been investigated before. If there's new evidence, like this informant,
but here's
it should be
David,
you know what, Ned, let me finish.
Let me ask you another question.
It should be investigated, and if anything else comes up, then we should investigate it further. But so far, Sessions has refused to put in place a special counsel because there isn't sufficient evidence for there to be a special counsel.
Well, David, let me jump in. David, let me jump in here.
All of this is.
The president. Plus, Russia investigators talked to Trump's longtime assistant. Who is Rona Graff and what does she know? Plus, the president hunkers down at Mar-a-Lago. Why the luxury estate always seems to be in the middle of controversy. Let's go out front. Good evening, I'm Pamela Brown in for Aaron Burnett. And out front tonight, not meeting the press. The president left Washington today without holding a traditional end-of-the-year press conference, something we are told Trump wanted to do. It's a surprising decision given the president could tout his biggest legislative accomplishment to date, that sweeping tax bill that is now the law of the land. But White House advisors overruled the president, we're told. Two White House officials telling CNN the fear was over questions about Russia, questions they clearly didn't want him to answer. But that didn't stop Trump from giving his own version of reality after he signed the tax bill into law. Here he is on Obamacare and the end of the individual mandate. Take a listen.
Essentially, I think Obamacare is over because of that, and we're going to come up with something that's really going to be very good.
So Obamacare is not over. 8.8 million people signed up for 2018 coverage, according to the Trump administration's own figures. Trump went on to boast about his own accomplishments.
We have more legislative victories than any other president.
Well, the bottom line is Trump has only had two major victories in Congress, this tax bill and the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch. And here's what he said about money from overseas.
We're going to bring back probably $4 trillion from overseas. Nobody knows the exact number, but it's massive. It'll be over $3 trillion. It could be $5 trillion, but it's a tremendous amount of money that was caught overseas.
And there's no guarantee the overseas money will come back to the U.S. And if it does, Fortune 500 companies report only $2.6 trillion offshore, according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Our Jeff Zeleny is out front with us tonight. So, Jeff, this is the first time in 15 years a president has not held a year-end news conference.
Good evening, Pamela. It certainly is a change from a tradition. Most presidents have year-end news conferences of some form or another. But for the last 15 years, they have had news conferences of President Obama, President Bush, and of course going back even much further. But the reality here is there was a sense among the president's advisors that they were worried that his accomplishments, mainly signing the tax bill into law, would be overshadowed perhaps by the Russia investigation or other questions that still hang over this White House. But the president seemed in a good mood. I was in the Oval Office with him when he was signing that bill. He seemed like he was more eager to answer questions. I can tell you, Pamela, aides were surrounding the Resolute desk there, urging reporters to leave the room. They were trying to get the president off to Florida. He did, of course, talk about the accomplishments, and he also talked about things to come in the new year.
And you managed to ask the president if he has any regrets from his first year, right?
We did ask if he has any regrets, and he shook his head no, perhaps not surprisingly. But there are some indications that he wants to try and change things up, potentially in the new year, talking about infrastructure first and foremost, saying Democrats should work with him. So I asked him if things would have been different this year if they would have started with infrastructure, working with Democrats rather than trying to repeal Obamacare. He said no, he wanted to save infrastructure for the second year because it's easier. But Pamela, now the question is, it's an open question if that's a wishful thinking or perhaps a New Year's resolution to work in a bipartisan way on infrastructure. So many Democrats now do not want to work with this White House. Republicans think some projects are too expensive. But that is one of the things to put on the top of the list for the new year.
All right, we'll have to see how that optimistic view pans out in the new year. Thanks so much, Jeff Zeleny. And out front tonight, Stephen Moore, former senior economic advisor for the Trump campaign. He was also an informal advisor to the White House on tax policy. Also with us, Keith Boykin, former Clinton White House aide, and Tim Naftali, CNN presidential historian and former director of the Nixon Presidential Library. Gentlemen, great to have you on.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
So, Tim, I'm going to just start with you, just for perspective here. What does it say to you that the president seems to be breaking with tradition by not holding a year-end press conference at this point?
Well, what's really interesting is that when Mr. Trump ran for president,
He pushed the idea that he was a great salesman. And he was very good at selling his candidacy, but he has not been that effective at selling his presidency. Look at his approval ratings. Why he would lose or miss an opportunity to promote his program and to answer questions deftly, I don't know. There are ways to distract from Russia. If he got a question he didn't want to answer, there are ways to handle that. You would think by now he would have learned how. But this president has only had one news conference. It is the lowest number of news conferences for any first-year president in modern presidential history. He doesn't have the practice. It's a shame. He missed a grand opportunity today.
And does it signal to you that his aides perhaps were concerned he didn't have the discipline to stick to an answer on the Russia investigation? And that's...
Well, I don't know their motives. Yeah. I'm saying that this is yet another missed opportunity for this president. He had a lot to say, he could have said, and he has to learn how to answer questions. Not every question was going to be about Russia.
Okay, Stephen, I'm going to go to you because, as Tim said, the president has bragged about being a salesman, yet he says the tax plan is becoming so popular that he won't need to sell it much. Let's take a listen.
Mr. President, can you talk a little bit about how much you'll travel to sell this tax
I don't think I'm going to have to travel too much to sell it. I think it's selling itself. It's becoming very popular. But I think you'll see something on February 1st when they open up the paycheck. That's when you're going to start to see it.
The polls show, Stephen, only 33% favor this plan. Do you think he's making a mistake thinking he doesn't have to sell it?
Well, look, Pamela, I mean, are these the same polls that showed that Hillary Clinton was going to win 40 states in November? I think we've all learned that polling isn't very accurate in terms of, how people really feel about things. But look, this was probably Donald Trump's best week in office. I think, it's interesting. You said, well, he only has 2 victories, the Supreme Court appointment of Gorsuch, and then, of course, this tax cut. That's like saying, well, gee, he only hit 2 grand slams in the bottom of the 9th inning.
Well, to be clear, he was saying he had more legislative victories than any past president. There were 2 legislative. He pointed out. So we were sticking with the facts there.
I know. I get it. I'm just saying, yeah, maybe he only had 2 legislative victories, but for conservatives, those are really, really big victories. And I got to tell you, there's a euphoria among conservatives the last couple of days over this tax bill. We were very nervous about whether it would happen. I'm not too concerned about the polls on the tax cut because I think that this victory kind of does speak for itself. And I do think when people see, number one, how it impacts the economy, and I'm predicting 4% growth next year, something that would be about double what we had under Obama, and when people actually see the money in their paychecks, I think there will be let me put it like this. I think Democrats, what are they going to run on? I'm going to get rid of that tax cut that Donald Trump gave you. I'm not sure that's a political winner.
Keith, you were shaking your head.
Where to begin? I mean, this tax bill is so unpopular. It's the least unpopular tax bill, I think, that we've seen in decades. It's less popular than Obamacare was at its lowest point. It's lower in popularity than even the 1993 Bill Clinton tax increase. How do you make a tax cut less popular than a tax increase? You do it by skewing the benefits primarily toward the wealthy, which this tax bill does. Now, the president missed an opportunity surely today because there are other things he could have been talking about that he did want to talk about, not just Russia. But the government has refused to do anything about the children's health insurance program with 9 million kids who were left uninsured potentially. They just left town and didn't deal with that issue. They haven't dealt with DACA. President Trump said he was going to he was going to build a wall. He was going to repeal and replace Obamacare. He was going to lock up Hillary Clinton. He was going to drain the swamp. All these promises that he said he was going to do. He didn't do any of those things. And we're left with the tax bill that basically just gives him a tax break and people like him.
On the Obamacare, though, he does say he repealed the individual mandate, but he's essentially getting rid of it. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But just to hit on your point on the tax bill, sure, it's unpopular in the polls, but as Stephen pointed out, more Americans will see more money in their paychecks. Companies like Comcast, Boeing, Wells Fargo, AT&T have already pledged to give bonuses, wage hikes to their employees. So do you think that will change, that it will become more popular because more people are going to see money in their paychecks?
Well, what we're probably going to see is a one-time impact on this. I mean, what's happening right now is that there's some political stunts and publicity stunts by various companies that are engaging in helping Donald Trump to sell this plan because because they benefit from the corporate tax reductions. But in addition to that, we're also seeing that historically, wage increases don't follow tax cuts like this. We saw this in 1986 with the tax reform from 1986. Wages actually fell during that period, 4-year period after the tax cuts. So there's no guarantee we're going to see any increase this time.
And quickly, to that point, there wasn't really a political lift after you saw the tax cut in 1986, Stephen.
I'm sorry, there wasn't what?
There wasn't the political lift. Republicans lost the midterm in 1986.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, you know, what's interesting, I was there in 86, and I was working for Ronald Reagan at the time. And, you know, that's the last time we reformed the tax system. And it's amazing to me. I mean, you go back to 1986, and I remember the vote on the Senate floor to cut the highest income tax rate to 28% from 50%. That passed 97-3. It was supported by Ted Kennedy, Al Gore, Howard Metzenbaum, virtually all of the Democrats. And it's amazing how the Democratic Party has degenerated to the fact that today or this week, not one single Democrat, none, not one in the House or Senate, voted for a tax bill because they said, oh, it's going to cut the highest tax rate to 37%. I mean, I have to say, the Democratic Party has become an anti-business party. Yes, Keith, you're right. Well, let me just make this point. Keith, you're right. This is a pro-business, pro-American business tax cut. It's going to help American corporations, American small businesses, but a lot of people on CNN have been saying it's a pro, you know, Nancy Pelosi said it. This just helps corporations. Well, we want to help corporations. We want jobs coming back to the United States and put America first. And boy, you know, the Europeans and the Asians are not happy at all about this tax cut.
But go ahead,
I just want, you know, this is not about the Democratic Party. This is about America. I wasn't there in 1986, but I was live, certainly. You remember, Mr. Moore, or Professor Moore, that because the 1986 tax reform was had so many problems with it, George Herbert Walker Bush, who succeeded Ronald Reagan, had to fix it, and it was called the 1990 Budget Act, and I remember that. You remember that? Yeah. Because the 1986. It was the worst. No, it was no. It was great. It may have been a disaster. It's why the Republicans lost the presidency. It's not about. It's not about party. It's about country. The Bush-Clinton recovery of the 1990s is a product of both the first President Bush's approach to tax reform and President Clinton's. No,
George Bush caused a recession. There was a recession in 1990 and 91 after Bush raised taxes.
No, you have your facts.
How can you say that was a success?
The reason why Bush raised taxes
George Bush announced he was going to raise taxes,
and then we had in 2017. But the reason why Bush raised taxes is because it created a deficit.
I'm going to let you come back. Let's listen to what
George Bush raised taxes, and the economy went into a recession.
Let me just say one thing here, Stephen. Okay, this tax bill that just passed, that President Trump signed, is going to blow a hole in the deficit for $1.5 trillion. This is something that even with dynamic scoring analysts, it's still talking about over $1 trillion out of the budget. So if you're talking about being fiscally restrained and fiscal conservatism, you can't support this tax bill. That's the reason why Democrats are so upset about the hypocrisy of Republicans saying that they cared about the deficit, and suddenly when it comes to giving taxes to the wealthy, tax cuts to the wealthy, they don't care about that. In 1990, when Bush raised taxes, it was because they had to do something to clear up the deficit that had been created from the tax cuts of the Reagan era. So let's not try to revise history.
Okay, really, I got to give Stephen the final word here. Go ahead, Stephen.
Actually, after we raised taxes in 1990, the deficit actually went up. It didn't go down. We called it the worst deal of the century. And by the way, that's changed the Republican Party forever. It's now a party that realized that when you raise taxes, you don't help the economy. But look, I think ultimately this will be resolved by how the economy does next year. If the economy really continues to boom as it's been doing under Trump, I think he will be vindicated, big league, as Donald Trump would say.
All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate that lively discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And out front, up next, Nancy Pelosi now warning about Republicans trying to shut down the Russia investigation next week. Could it happen? Plus, the political divide on sexual assault. Why don't Republicans take it as seriously as Democrats? We'll show you some stunning new numbers from our new CNN poll. And Jeannie Moe's on the Christmas gift for that someone special.
Introducing the original Trumpy Bear.
Tonight, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi warning House Speaker Paul Ryan not to let Republicans shut down the Russia investigation. Pelosi writing in the letter, quote, Democrats are deeply concerned by the majority's efforts to curtail the House Intelligence Committee investigation and its overall failure to address Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. We expect that you will take urgent action to ensure this investigation can continue and justice can be pursued unhindered. Out front tonight, Democratic Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She is a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Thank you so much for coming on. I want to just first ask you, do you share Pelosi's concern that Republicans are trying to shut down the investigation?
Pamela, first of all, let me wish you and all of America a very, very happy holiday season and a blessed one. We've had some difficult times. I absolutely do. And it comes from the tens upon tens of letters that the House Democrats sent to Republicans dealing with having a fair review in the Judiciary Committee of what happened in the election. On January 6, 2018, it will be 1 year to the date that the intelligence community indicated that Russia absolutely did interfere with the 2016 election and skew it, if you will, to candidate Trump. From that time, we have seen a number of Trump operatives be indicted, including Mr. Manafort, Mr. Gates, Mr. Papadopoulos, General Flynn. And we've seen the president engage with Republicans in the worst, if you will, abuse of an individual and his work as relates to Special Counsel Mueller. And when I say abuse, he's been called corrupt. He's been called acting like a KGB agent. He's been called infected with bias or his investigation, all to taint the general population.
Well, you're not hearing that specifically from the president. You're not hearing that. The president actually has been surprisingly quiet on Mueller, and the White House has consistently said that it has no plans or no consideration to fire Mueller.
Well, that's a very good point. The White House does not have to say much because Republicans are saying it for him. I think what would be helpful, and what Leader Pelosi is saying to both Mr. Ryan, I know her letter was to Speaker Ryan, I believe the President and Speaker Ryan would do well right during this holiday season to reinforce their commitment to the unfettered investigation in the House Intelligence Committee and maybe ultimately in the House Judiciary Committee. And as well, the President reaffirmed his affirmation of confidence in the Federal Bureau of Investigation overall and Special Counsel Mueller, a Vietnam vet, and a director who was appointed by two presidents, President Bush, George W. Bush, and President Obama. That has not been the tone from the White House. And I might argue that what you hear is that as the Republicans continue to taint this investigation, both the special counsel and the intelligence committees in the House and the Senate, this gives the president the opportunity to pardon some of the individuals that have been indicted.
And to be clear, the White House has said, the lawyer for the president has said they have no plans to pardon either. But let me just ask you, what proof do you have that Republicans are trying to shut down the investigation beyond the rhetoric that you pointed out?
Well, we know that Chairman Nunes is having backroom investigations. We know that the Republicans are trying to distract from the Russian investigation, which really goes to the core of democracy. It has to do with how did we get to where we are in terms of the elections. I know there's a dispute of how Mr. Trump got elected. He is now the president of the United States. But you certainly can't negate what the intelligence community said in January of 2017, which was that Russia definitely interfered with that election. What I see is that Republicans on the Judiciary Committee are trying to call for a special counsel and also the president's lawyers for an investigation into the Clinton emails. They're trying to distract away from the investigation of Special Counsel Mueller. They're trying to suggest because there were individual agents who expressed personal opinions and they have a right to do so as American citizens. They were gotten rid of or moved away from the investigation immediately, that tainted the entire investigation. Is setting the atmosphere for the American people possibly to be challenged as it relates to their confidence in the process. That goes a long way. That's why I believe it is important, if the president is serious about not pardoning individuals or serious about letting this investigation go forward and get to the ultimate truth, how and when and where did Russia interfere with this campaign or this election, that his son did not rush to the meetings with the Russian lawyer and others when he heard that there was dirt on Clinton and that there were not other conspiratorial ways of trying to undermine this election. If the president would simply say he has confidence, then I would believe that would go a long way in giving us confidence that he does not intend to fire Special Counsel Mueller or shut it down.
Okay, let me just jump in here with Paul Ryan's spokeswoman in her response to Pelosi's letter. In a statement, she says, to suit her political agenda, Leader Pelosi would like to see this investigation go on forever. That is obvious whether it concludes next month, next year, or in 3 years. She will say it is too soon. The investigation will conclude when the committee has reached a conclusion. So when is enough enough?
Well, I think I totally disagree with Speaker Ryan's spokesperson. Leader Pelosi is a former member of the intelligence community. Intelligence committee. I'm on a intelligence subcommittee on Homeland Security, and I'm on the crime and terrorism subcommittee. We know when these investigations begin. We know that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. We are not in any way wishing to push an investigation beyond its life, beyond its final report. And so what Speaker Ryan should be responding is, thank you, Leader Pelosi. You can be assured that they have my commitment to the committee and to the leadership of the committee, Democrats and Republicans, that we will allow them to finish their legitimate work. There's no member of Congress that wants to make waste, that wants to waste time investigating and getting nothing from it. But we feel the atmosphere. We questioned for 6 hours yesterday the Deputy Director McCabe. Of course, it was a confidential meeting, but it was driven by Republicans. They don't want to discuss anything dealing with, this is on judiciary, anything dealing with the idea of the Russian interference with elections or the obstruction of justice, but they wanted to probe Mr. McCabe on his wife's running for office. So what I'm saying is they're creating the atmosphere to tank the investigation, both with Special Counsel Mueller and as well with the Intelligence Committee that is working in the House. Okay. What we want from the Republicans is to be as quick to make political statements, which they're making, about Leader Pelosi's very straightforward letter, protect the investigation. We want Speaker Ryan to stand up and say, this investigation is legitimate. I want my chairman and my ranking member to follow every trail and to finish their report legitimately on behalf of the American people. That would be the statement that we want to see.
Okay, Congresswoman, thank you so much.
Thank you so very much as well for having me.
And out front, up next, new reports of a warning from the RNC chairwoman to the White House about Trump's support for Roy Moore. A warning that fell on deaf ears. And the woman who knows everything about Donald Trump interviewed by the House Intelligence Committee.
If there are bodies buried somewhere in the Trump organization, Ronograph will be able to point out where they lie.
Tonight, a new CNN poll shows a deep divide along party lines when it comes to sexual assault and harassment. 85% of Democrats say it's a serious problem in the U.S., compared with just 45% of Republicans. And when it comes to whether an elected official should resign over sexual harassment allegations, 78% of Democrats and just 37% of Republicans say yes. And as for the president, 85% of Democrats say the way President Trump treats women is an indicator of his ability to serve as president. Only 38% of Republicans agree with that. Out front now, former communications director for Senator Ted Cruz, Amanda Carpenter, and co-chair of the Women for Trump PAC, Amy Kramer. Ladies, thank you for coming on. There's a lot to discuss here with the polls and everything going on. And Amy, I'm going to start with you. Are you concerned that GOP voters are on the wrong side of history with this issue?
You know, I think that GOP voters are upset about using this as a political advantage. It is definitely a serious issue, and I'm glad that it's come to the forefront and we are having this conversation. Obviously, there's a big problem in Washington, but I think that people are upset that they're seeing that this issue is being used to drive a wedge for a political purpose. purposes, and that's why there's a divide there. And I believe that the Democrats absolutely are using this as a wedge issue, and I think they need to be careful about that.
I have to mention this, though. You did support Roy Moore,
Yes.
and we know what the allegations against him were. He lost after the allegations came to light, even though before that he was projected to win, and women played a big role in handing him the victory. So it does appear that this is playing into voters' minds.
Yeah, Pamela, I agree with you. And listen, I mean, we originally endorsed Mo Brooks in the primary in that race, and we got behind Roy Moore because it was a choice of who is going to support and push for the president's agenda of securing the border and tax reform and repeal and replace of Obamacare. And Roy Moore was the candidate that was going to do that. I respect the voters of Alabama. They absolutely had the information in front of them when they went to the polls. They made their decision. He has not conceded, and I think he should concede. But there's a difference there than, say, with President Trump, that, the voters had the information in front of them, and they went to the polls and they chose President Trump to be the president of the United States. And so we've litigated that. Alabama litigated the Roy Moore race, and it fell where they wanted it to fall, and I respect that decision.
Right, and to be clear, you did campaign with Roy Moore, although you do say sexual harassment is a serious issue. Amanda, what do you think is behind the divide here?
Well, listen, allegations of sexual harassment have always been a political weapon. It's always used to drive a wedge against opponents. And if you want evidence of that, look to the 2016 race where Donald Trump paraded Bill Clinton's accusers before a presidential debate. So that happened. But here's the thing. It's going to go back in Donald Trump's face soon enough, because Donald Trump has his own accusers. So we're going to have another whole round of this. And what remains to be seen, is this going to be a top voting issue? In 2016, it wasn't. Maybe it was because Donald Trump drove Hillary Clinton's negatives up so high, but it didn't stop him. And so the Democrats, how are they going to play this? Are they going to go all in on trying to beat this around Trump again? And maybe they'll have some traction, right? Because people are much more comfortable talking about these issues. I think people would be much more willing to look over Donald Trump's past with more of an enlightened eye. There are people that didn't even want to touch the comments that he made about his daughter because they thought they were too tawdry. I think the environment has changed. But it has to go into Donald Trump's character. And, if they're betting on just taking him down on sexual harassment allegations or his unwillingness to talk about that, it wasn't enough before.
And Amy, you do point out that, yes, Donald Trump was elected despite the allegations of sexual harassment allegations from several women. However, the cultural landscape has changed. There has been a movement, and poll numbers among Republican women are going down for Donald Trump. Are you concerned that this could hurt Republicans in the polls come midterms? I mean, sorry. Well, her voters, voters will vote against Republicans come the midterms.
I mean, of course I'm concerned. Absolutely. And I think the party should be concerned. But this is the thing, is that when you have John Solomon coming out last Thursday or Friday, with this report about some of these accusers being paid money, their mortgages being paid off, I mean, there's a big problem there. And the American people have the ability to understand that. While it is sensational for us to talk about it, and it's definitely an issue that we're facing right now in this country, and I think it's good that the conversation is front and center, at the end of the day, when people go into that voting booth, what they vote on are things that affect them personally. And we just saw historic tax reform passed. And if President Trump goes out there and continues to do what he has said he's going to do, because he is
CNN. God bless Trumpy Bear. New York.